Gentlemen, welcome to another Team Fortress 2 reaction. This is going to be Uncle Dane's informative video on the panic attack, which is good, actually. Let's get into it.
Dispenser going up.
The classic Uncle Dane intro. You know, I gotta say, I think his videos have actually helped me a lot. If you've joined me on Twitch for my Team Fortress 2 streams, you know that I've actually feel like I've had a couple of solid moments recently, right? I had a game as Scout where I was actually flanking and moving appropriately. It was great.
Well, I guess that'll do.
Now, the panic attack rework, I was personally disappointed in. Basically, it's been buffed on every class except for the engineer, but it technically works better as a secondary. I mean, it used to be a good engineer weapon, so it's not really an engineer shotgun anymore. I mean, I'm sure that if I played with the panic attack more, I'd probably eventually just end up bumping it up, but I don't know. Every other shotgun except for the Thompson was a better option than the panic attack before the rework, and it looks to remain that way.
Have you ever been wrong?
Oh my gosh, Uncle Dane is going to have self-insight.
I've been wrong
Actually, it's just insight.
about some stuff from time to time, but mainly in the long-gone era of TF2 pushing updates every year. First impressions of a weapon, when it's been added or changed, generally becomes the solidified opinion that you guys hear from me. But first impressions are subject to change. Because
I'm here to tell you guys, okay, so in psychological research, the term for the ability to look at your own thinking and yourself and your own perspective sort of from the outside is called insight. And therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, they're going to sort of grade their patients informally on their level of insight. So they'll say, for example, this patient has a lot of insight. And an example of someone who has a lot of insight would be to say, someone who goes, I can't go to sporting events because I know that I will get really into it and I will start drinking. You're like, oh, okay, that person knows who they are and how they think. They're aware that they're a mind that thinks and feels, right? A low level of insight would be something like, why do you think you tried to hit your brother? And they go, because he was pissing me off. Or like, right? It was, you notice how their own feelings have no agency. They have no agency, right? They hit their brother because of something he did. He made me mad. So it's really his fault, your brother's fault that they got hit by making that person mad. They view themselves as being almost like a machine who functions on autopilot, and they themselves have no agency, right? So people with tons of insight will sit there and go, say things like, I am someone who really values routine, so I'm quicker to anger or more irritated with things that disrupt my routine, even if it's someone I care about, or even if the routine is good for me. You're like, oh, that's like a lot of insight, right? That's someone who knows that their emotions are subordinate to them. So when you see people, sometimes the process of therapy is trying to get people to grow their level of insight into how they behave, that they learn to manage themselves, their relationships, their emotions with the same level of efficacy that people manage, for example, staying on top of maintaining their car, right? They know they need to clean it and change the oil and do certain things and, put the right gas in it. The same thing with a person. You understand the quirks and idiosyncrasies of yourself. And so with the right inputs, you can have a smoother drive.
because the more situations you get yourself into with a weapon, the more you begin to understand the intricacies of what the real upsides and downsides of the weapon actually are. Experience molds your views, one fight, one victory, one failure at a time. And over time, you truly begin to hone in on what you actually think about something. In an age of hot takes and first impression opinions being more visible than ever,
What? Donald J. Trump. I think random crits are great. They're the best thing at TF2. Believe me, the fake news lied when they said I wanted to remove random crits from TF2. Oh, thanks. Thanks for that. I needed that today.
sometimes difficult to discern the views that come from experience and the views that don't. So, I'd like to take a moment of your time to go back and re-examine an engineer weapon that I've talked about in the past, of which my opinion has changed. The short circuit. When the short circuit was heavily reworked in the Blue Moon update 2 years ago, a lot of people lost
Short circuit. Did he just do a bamboozle? I really came here for the panic attack. I run the panic attack.
their minds, myself included. The short circuit, a little nub on the end of the engineer's arm, had suddenly changed from a little yellow taser to a
What is with this CRT style lines? If you don't know what I'm talking about, cathode ray tubes, when they will transmit signals, images, I believe they are actually drawing pixelated lines across the screen, like a printer, except they do it again and again and again very rapidly. I think I'm getting that right. If I'm not, commenters, let me know. Cathode ray tubes. I know they are rays of light that project, and I think they do it by just doing streaks down a TV to create the animated effect.
concept straight from the realms of science fiction. My first impressions on this thing were compiled into a video and uploaded to my channel 3 weeks after I had been able to play with what was essentially a brand new weapon for the first time. Now, after 2 years,
I love how he's like 3 weeks of playing straight with the weapon, and then he's like, now I have enough information to make an impulse video. Okay, I think I have probably the equivalent of, someone told me the other day, I have 48 hours in Team Fortress 2, right? So I'm not qualified to weigh in on anything.
years of using the short circuit, I can confidently say that I've gotten a pretty decent grasp on the intricacies of the weapon. Experience molded my views, and the good news is, 90% of what I said in this video, I still agree with entirely. The short circuit is a subpar defensive option when maintaining a level 3 sentry gun nest, especially with the existence of the Wrangler shield. However, it provides the Battle NG subclass with an option to hold his own in 1v1 fights with projectile-based classes like Soldier and Demo Man. The short circuit isn't a get out of rocket
This is a lot for not a panic attack. I'm just gonna point this out there.
free card like some people who clearly have never used it for more than a few minutes would be led to believe. It requires the engineer to pay attention to his metal, make snap decisions on if firing an energy ball is even worth it, and believe it or not, requires you to aim and time your shots effectively to achieve the desired effect. The metal cost of the short circuit is what makes the weapon balanced, and in the best case scenario, you can shoot it 3 times before you're a sitting duck. An inexperienced engineer can only use it to deal minimal damage while delaying the inevitable. Using the short circuit alongside the engineer's primary is where it shines, and when it comes to combining it with your weapons that require aim, only the skilled will succeed. However, where the short circuit ceases to be a tool that aids the engineer in 1v1 situations or initiating pushes through spammable chokes is within a very specific popular game mode in a very specific situation, pushing the payload cart. In my short circuit video, I barely touched on this weapon's
I mean, this is so what fascinates me about Team Fortress 2 is the level of sophistication of the tactics, right? Very few games, almost none, last an entire decade of popularity. And Team Fortress 2 is exceptional in that a decade after its release, it remains highly popular. And I think a function of the fact, I think its simplicity is a big driver. I think the fact that the rise actually of the Battle Royale game is another driver, because Battle Royales are sort of intrinsically inaccessible to most people, right? Only ultra high skill players really can derive any sort of a chance of winning a Battle Royale. In contrast, just about anyone can log into Team Fortress 2 and will be able to get some W's, even some kills, despite not being highly skilled. If you've been on my stream, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, what I think is important is that as a result of this, so 12 years of continuous play and strategic updates, is that the level of detail, right? I think the only game that may come close is CSGO, because that's, I think, year 10 of its existence right now. And it's so similar to the original Counter-Strike that a lot of the strategies and tactics carry over. But other than that, right, this level of advanced tactical and strategic thinking is almost unheard of in a game. I would be curious to know, right? Because you have the hours, the total hours people have spent on Team Fortress 2, right? So that's player base times hours played in their lifetime. And I wonder if any other game has actually ever come close.
Effectiveness while using it next to the payload cart simply because I hadn't been in that situation enough to fully understand what might be broken about it. Simply put, the payload cart's infinite metal supply nullifies the entire balancing set of making the energy ball expensive. The engineer...
You know, it's one of the things actually, as I think about it, that I always found sort of fascinating is that I had a pet theory when I was on active duty that the U.S. military at the end of the Second World War probably had more total combat experience, which is hours in combat, time or total number of people in combat times hours served, right? So if you spent 4 years in combat, but 1 million or 10 million people served, and they served for 4 straight years or until the end of the war, then you have this X hundreds of millions of man hours spent accruing combat experience, and how that would stack up against like Afghanistan and Iraq, where a much smaller number of soldiers spent a smaller number of years deployed, but it was 20 years of total military experience.
Doesn't have to make a decision on if shooting the ball would be worth it, because it always will be. He can just keep doing it. Now, I want to be clear that I think that this only really becomes a problem when we're talking about the payload cart. The engineer can do practically the exact same thing on a dispenser, but because the dispenser can only hold up to 400 metal, which requires a lot of time to build up in the first place, his supply runs out quicker than you might expect. Not to mention, depleting your entire dispenser of metal just to delete some rocket spam for a few seconds is quite possibly one of the most wasteful things you can do as an engineer. But when it comes to the payload cart, wastefulness does not come into play. The cart's infinite supply of metal lobotomizes the engineer, and he can spam the energy ball to cheese the cap until someone with bullets can take care of him. This is where I think the short circuit could be nerfed, specifically in the case of the payload cart. In previous iterations, the short circuit would prevent you from getting metal from the payload cart and dispensers while it was active, forcing you to put it away in order to collect metal. I think this downside should make a return. Disallow the engineer from collecting metal from the payload cart.
Yeah, this is interesting. It's interesting and unfortunate. Did Valve end up fixing this? Because this does seem like a pretty wide exploit. But on the other hand, in a game with a lot of area damage, there's a real downside to being this close to a place. This is, of course, supply and logistics targeting at its finest, right? You know that your enemy it relies on supply and logistics bases, so it's probably going to, you're going to be able to find them. You've fixed them to a location. That location is always going to be the cart, and even if they're more dangerous, you can rely on area weapons to destroy them.
And only the payload cart. I don't think it should prevent you from collecting it from dispensers, and it should apply while you have it equipped instead of only while it's active. Quickly switching between weapons would partially negate this downside, so I think it should be impossible to collect infinite payload metal altogether. Metal is already so abundant in other less risky areas that I don't really think it would affect the engineer all that much. And one more thing I would like to see changed about the short circuit is the visibility. This thing is big, bright, and you cannot see through it. Since this thing is the most effective when fired parallel to someone's line of sight, the short circuit often acts as a flashbang that makes both the user and the victim unable to see their target for a second. I personally think lowering visibility tends to make engagements more frustrating for everyone involved, so if the opacity of the
I think that's actually a great addition to have a small blurring or obscuring effect.
energy ball was brought down to like 50%, I think that would be a positive change in general. They should also do that with the Pyro's Flames as well. Anyway, have you ever gone on a massive tangent?
Ah, there we are, the panic attack. Da, da, da. A weapon that I carry and don't use frequently enough. Is this the Panic Attack theme song?
Oh, fuck! What in Sam Hill were you thinking?
The Panic Attack has been through a lot. It used to be pretty bad, then it was good, then it was alright, then it was really good, but in this transition, I think most people didn't bother taking notice because a lot of players, like myself, kind of enjoyed the weird beggar's bazooka shotgun, and maybe we were a little bitter that they took away a quirky concept and turned it into something much less interesting. But what I didn't realize until I had finally decided to give this thing a second chance over 2 years later is that while the panic attack was transformed from a multi-class shotgun that worked really well on one class into a multi-class shotgun that worked pretty alright on multiple classes, was that all this time I was forgetting something obvious. Shotguns are pretty powerful, man. Before we dive deeper, let's quickly go over the panic attack stats, starting with the fact that it fires 50% more bullets per shot. This means that while the stock shotgun shoots 10 bullets, this thing shoots 15. These 15 bullets always leave the barrel of the shotgun in a fixed spread pattern that looks like this, but we'll talk a lot more about that later.
Yeah, this is actually, if you've seen me play Tarkov, you know this is also why I love shotguns in Tarkov. I'm just a fan of to whom it may concern type shooting. I really don't like high precision shooting. I don't think I'm good at it. I don't think I have the instincts for it. I'm no Dr. Disrespect, right? The king of the sniper rifle. And I think more time I can spend pumping rounds downrange, the better off I am. This is a military principle, sometimes called massed fire or suppressive fire, right? Suppressive fire tends to be in smaller units, or smaller groups like a squad. And it basically says that that a high volume of fire produces effects all its own, even if it's not necessarily all that accurate. And that's because inaccurate but high volume fire just makes maneuver dangerous. It makes going anywhere dangerous because the threats are everywhere, right? In contrast to like a bolt action or sniper rifle where there's occasional rounds, but they are highly precise, they can have the same effect, but not. It's harder to achieve that, right? You can't have a unit of long-range snipers, though in World War I, at least the U.S. Marines attempted to create that by having everyone trained in these like 600-meter long distance engagements.
The panic
with iron sights.
Attack itself deploys 50% faster, which makes it ideal for quick switching between your other weapons. And the downsides are that despite the gun shooting more bullets, each individual bullet does 20%.
Mildly bothered, shotguns don't shoot bullets. They shoot, they can shoot buckshot or they can shoot slugs, right? Or I'm sorry, they can shoot shot or slugs, right? Shot refers to small pellets that come out of the round, right? These can be birdshot, which will be 20 like very small pellets, 20 or more, tiny little BBs, or buckshot, which can be 8 or fewer larger BBs, right? Smaller creatures need a smaller diameter BB to achieve a lethal kill or a quick, merciful, and lethal kill, right? So if you want to take out a buck, peppering them with tiny 1 to 2 millimeter BBs is actually just going to be really cruel because they'll die, but not for a long time, right? So it's not bullets per shot, it's BBs in the case of the shotgun. But you can also load a shotgun, of course, with slugs. Slugs are closer to what we would consider a bullet. It's a single hunk of lead. It sort of has a bullet-like shape, but unlike a bullet, which is expected to pass through the barrel and get a level of spin so that it's rifled and begins to rotate, a slug is just sort of pumped through straight on. That's why it's not expected to be accurate at the same type of distances that you would expect a bullet, which gets a spin.
Less damage. And as you fire the panic attack repeatedly, over time, the spread of these bullets grows wider and wider. So let's start with the quick switch thing, because despite it being the most noticeable thing when using the panic attack, I tend to believe that it's the least important to the engineer, albeit not entirely useless. See, when you think about how the panic attack is used on other classes, you can clearly see the synergy it provides when it's equipped in the secondary slot, in particular when it comes to the pyro and the soldier. The main source of damage these classes do comes from their primary weapons, which means that the panic attack switch speed comes into play every time someone needs to be finished off, when you're out of rockets, or if the enemy is retreating out of your effective range. The panic attack
I forget this is pyro, that I could switch to my secondary and finish the job.
Works quite well as a finisher because if used in this way, you'll only have to fire the thing once or twice, effectively nullifying one of the weapon's major downsides. So when you equip it as a primary on the
I mean, it's a question of, is it a major downside, right? Because as a person retreats from you, that greater spread is going to compensate for the reduced accuracy.
Engineer,
You'll be dealing less damage, but presumably if they're running away, they've already received a significant amount of damage.
probably think, well, the switch speed won't really matter because you don't really combo things as NG. And that's kind of true, but who said comboing things was the only use that you could get out of the faster switch speed? Actually, the engineer who's doing his job won't always have his shotgun out. He'll be smacking a bunch of stuff with a wrench. With the exception of Demo Knight and maybe Spy, the engineer...
That's a good point, right? Engineer, more than almost any other class, is going to have to multitask among his weapons.
There's the class
or his features
that will probably have his melee weapon out for most of the game. So switching to your shotgun actually happens more than you might realize, and a lot of the time, brevity is of the most importance when you're already busy slapping everything in sight.
He had a panic attack out on the next frame and then I died.
You can also abuse the quick switch to make other Battle NG loadouts more effective, such as pairing it with the pistol for softening up your target while closing the distance, or using it with the short circuit to engage 1v1s with soldiers and demo men. It can also be pretty easy to assume that because Engineer will likely be firing his shotgun repeatedly as his primary source of direct damage, the panic attack's incremental spread should come into play all the time, and would generally be a worse option compared to the stock. But this is where actually using the thing tends to prove that theory wrong, because especially after Blue Moon came along and cut the maximum spread almost in half, the difference is hardly noticeable past close range, which is the distance every shotgun should be effective at anyway. Besides, it's actually...
Right. This is true. And so here's the thing with military weapons generally. Ranges matter a lot, right? There is, what they call small arms range, which is usually considered 300 to 600 meters, which is a long way, right? But there's also considered like indirect fire weapons range, which can be up to like 10 miles. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff in between. And it's important to know at a detailed level what sort of stuff your enemy brings to the fight, because that's going to dictate how you engage them. Because the best fight is the one where there's only rounds coming from you to the enemy. And the worst fight is where you can't reach the enemy, but they can reach you. And so you have to do everything in your power to ensure that you are able to bring you engage the enemy at ranges that are favorable to you, in a range and in a location and in a time that is all favors you. And the enemy's goal, of course, is to create those conditions for themselves. And this is why so much of warfare is waiting around, right? Or the hurry up and wait of warfare. It's because there's not really much of a reason to make a decisive engagement of your troops, because you can't create more troops and you can't generate more equipment in the short term. And so you have to use them sparingly. You have to use them respectfully. And so in order to do that, you have to make sure you get the time and the place and the location of the fight.
Actually pretty easy to reset the cooldown. All you gotta do is wait until you start the reload animation or quickly switch between weapons. And sometimes the increased spread can be beneficial if you're just going for long range chip damage, because at a certain point, the bullets cover a pretty large area. Quick aside, you might be wondering why you would even want to chip damage someone with a shotgun. Well, honestly, if you're in a situation where you should probably be pointing your gun somewhere more important, it's not that impactful. But chip damage actually can have lasting effects on the enemy team just beyond irritating them. There is a hidden mechanic on the medigun where you can heal someone faster if they haven't taken any damage for 10 seconds. So even if you do like 3 damage to someone across the map, they won't be able to be efficiently healed right away. So yeah, if you can see someone, you might as well shoot them, even though you're...
There's also a concept called harassing fire or turning. And this is this concept where you actually want the enemy to turn and face and divert their combat power to you, or a feint is sometimes what it's also referred to. And so if you're going to do a feint, this would be like scout making a flanking maneuver. What you want the enemy to do is to deal with the fact that you are harassing them. And by chipping at them, you're letting them know that you're there, and you're letting them know that if they turn and continue to face the primary direction, that you are going to get closer, and that chip damage will become much greater. So they have no choice but to turn and deal with you, and then turn back and deal with your teammates. So it can be an effective strategy, especially if you know that your teammates are there and either cannot be pushed or are going to be pushing.
Doing some mosquito type crap. Back to the panic attack though, because the individual bullets do less damage, that basically means that at medium to long range, you're going to be doing less damage compared to the shotgun. But if you're actually trying to kill someone, why would you do that? You got to get up close and personal to be effective with every shotgun, and the panic attack at that range actually does significantly more damage, up to 108 in fact, 16% more than the stock, and even slightly more than the Scout Scattergun. Now, in order to take advantage of the maximum damage that the panic attack puts out, you really gotta get within breath-smelling distance of your enemy, which can be pretty risky, but oh so rewarding if you can play it right. But even if you play it relatively safer and stand at the intended effective range of a shotgun away from your target, you'll still end up doing more damage than stock simply because there are 5 more bullets hitting your enemy, despite those bullets doing less damage on their own. This means that you can reliably 3-shot a heavy, 2-shot a soldier, and even secure kills on classes that might not have died without another round from the stock shotgun. The clear situation in which the panic attack actually begins to do less damage in comparison to the stock is when you fire it from medium range or further, which is a fair trade-off in my opinion because, like I said, getting close to your target is almost always where shotguns are going to be the most deadly. However, despite the panic...
Yeah, this is actually a problem for the engineer because he doesn't have the speed, right? This is why a lot of forces, it may seem silly to be like, oh, maneuverability counts for a lot. This is why, for example, that U.S. Army vests, right? We went over to plate carriers. They're actually, plate carriers are less well armored than, say, IOTVs or IBAs. Obviously, they have the same assault rifle plates, but they don't have the same amount of Kevlar that can catch 9mm rounds in fragmentation. So the reason they make that trade-off is because plate carriers are so very, very light, and that lightweight armor, right, the bare minimum, allows troops to maneuver into and out of defensive or offensive situations much quicker. They can get behind cover. They can push the enemy faster, right? They can just be a lot more dynamic. And again, it seems like something that wouldn't make a difference, that being slow but well armored has its advantages. But as we see with heavy, anyone that's ever been a heavy main knows that maneuver and positioning can trump power and durability any day of the week if used properly.
Panic attack clearly being the better option at close range, I'd argue that the increased damage or the faster switch speed is only secondary to the impact of this one stat. The panic attack fires a fixed shot pattern, which hands down is the best thing about the gun because of one overlooked feature of casual mode TF2: random bullet spread.
The bullets go wherever the hell they want. You can't control bullets? You think you can tell bullets what to do?
In Valve's
Man, a sniper would like to hear your location.
official servers, a hidden stat is applied to every shotgun and every scattergun in the game. Most of the bullets go in random directions within an invisible cone. This means that every time you fire your shotgun, there is a chance your bullets can hit a target more or less than the shot that you fired before it.
9.
Simply put, shotguns fired at anything other than point-blank range have a tendency to do a random spread of damage. The argument for why this is not an ideal concept for a first-person shooter like TF2 has been discussed to death by everyone, including myself. But as long as this mechanic remains in vanilla TF2, the panic attack benefits from it immensely. Because the panic attack always fires in a fixed pattern, even at medium range where the damage is statistically lower than the shotgun, the consistency of the damage makes it easier for skilled players to plan ahead and use their experience to...
Oof, that is a really high level of skill to be able to count up damage in your head, knowing the distance that you're in. I mean, again, a testament to the fact that there are players with this level of skill. And, you know, sometimes you think about it and it's a little preposterous to be like, okay, what could you have done with 10,000 hours in TF2, right? 10,000 hours. You could have become a master programmer. You could have mastered another language, literally like become a translator. You could have become a great writer, not that that's any more monetizable than being a great TF2 player.
To their advantage. There's nothing more frustrating than shooting your shotgun, failing to kill someone who you
But again, there's boomers out there who have spent 10,000 hours on their model trains or their ships in a bottle or yelling at Tucker Carlson on Fox News. So, you know, TF2 compared to those things is like it's ultra productive.
War could have died all because your bullets decided to go somewhere slightly different this time. As a result, any time you are playing on a server with random bullet spread enabled, you're largely leaving your shotgun damage up to a dice roll. The panic attack removes this randomness from the equation completely, and in my experience, reliable consistency trumps slightly more power every time. So here we are. It only took me a couple years to wise up to this thing, but my overall opinion boils down to this. When I'm playing in casual mode, I automatically will choose the panic attack over the shotgun simply because the fixed spread is so impactful. However, when I'm playing in competitive mode or on community servers where random bullet spread is disabled, I tend to lean more towards using the stock shotgun because I'm able to experience the best of both worlds, consistency and higher damage. However, if I happen to be playing on a map where close quarters engagements are more common, such as Dust Bowl or Upward Last, the panic attack is almost always a better choice. It's also the superior weapon to use when equipping the short circuit, since it makes projectile class 1v1s slightly more efficient. So yeah, for a side grade, the benefits come into play.
Yeah, guys, let me know, by the way, the next time I stream, if you guys have a particular weapon loadout that you want me to do. You know, I'm happy to accommodate you, the fans, who, believe it or not, the other day, I was technically the #1 Team Fortress 2 streamer in the world on Twitch.
For the
That felt pretty cool.
engineer quite a lot
My wife was not as impressed.
more than I was expecting, and in fact has solidified my opinion that the panic attack is generally a better shotgun in most situations. But if you'd like to avoid using the panic attack, or maybe even having a panic attack, you can come and play on my community servers. I have random bullet spread disabled there. You can visit uncledane.com/servers to see
Interesting. Random bullet spread is off on Uncletopia. Huh.
the full list of server locations. And if you want to get a cool hat, I got this cool hat that says BAP on it. It's kind of like the Gap Athletic logo. It's kind of a parody of that. Yeah, I don't really know if that reference was made very clear before. I mean, I think it's pretty good. All right, bye.
I like the name of your panic attack, by the way. That's funny.
That is pretty funny. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining me. If you want to come play Team Fortress 2 with me, join me on Twitch. You guys could just, let's be honest, you guys can just stream snipe me there, which you do anyway, but you can also join the server I'm in because I just usually do Uncletopias because that has decent players and isn't spammed with bots. So that's cool. And you should also become a patron. Get access to exclusive content. Thank you to our Lieutenant tier patrons, Cole Foster, Caffeinated, Chris, Command Unit, Jakob Flavius, and Dr. Shadowcop. Yeah, they get access to exclusive content, exclusive room on the Discord, and they help support me, Paul, the MHGR. All right, guys, that's all I got. I'll see you guys later.